As humans learning how to get along in the society that we have created takes a lifetime. It really does, and we have to learn to adapt. And of course, one of the things that you have to learn to do is deal with death. Okay, I mean, it's just the way the world works, because because your parents are going to die. They're older than you are. Your grandparents probably died when you were teenagers or whatever. Well, you're kind of older than a teenager, I'm thinking. But usually your grandparents died when you're in your 20s or 30s.
My dad, the year I was born.
I didn't have any grandparents. My grandparents were all dead before I was born, so yeah. Anyway, but both of my parents have died, and I have a sister that died. That's as much fun as that is. So this is what you have to do. You have to learn how to deal with things. Working in the hospital, of course, we deal with this kind of stuff all the time. See, I almost said shit. I didn't do that. That was good. Our memory is the culmination of our ability to learn about life and life circumstances. And the reality is, I've dealt with death a lot, and I just don't think about it. I just don't worry about it. I don't remember any of it. You know, I remember individual cases, but I've seen thousands and thousands of bodies, of cadavers. It is our memory that allows us to act appropriately in situations, and of course, obviously, I'm acting inappropriately in this situation. If we kill someone or drive on the left side of the road, unless you're in England or Japan, of course, then society's going to do something with you. They'll take you out. If you murder somebody, if you start robbing people.
Unless you're deployed, then it's all good.
Oh, you mean you can drive on either side of the road?
No, unless you're deployed.
Oh, and kill somebody? Yeah, that's probably okay as long as it's not somebody in the same color uniform that you're wearing. You're probably right. Our memory dictates our behavior, and of course, we behave because of what we remember. Oddly, psychologists and medical doctors have been able to trace and map the memory process using individuals who have damaged select areas of the brain due to tumors, lesions, or trauma. We usually don't dig into people's brains. If we do that, we really mess them up. These insults to the brain cause lapses of memory that, looked at in toto, construct a memory map to the process. And that's how we have done this as psychologists. Now we have functional MRIs, we have PET scans, so we can track memory and find out where it starts and where it ends up. We can do that now, but in the old days, of course, we couldn't. So in the beginning, the only way that we had a clue about any of this stuff was by looking at people who had damaged portions of their brain. There are several types of learning. One of them is skill learning. It's learning to perform a task that requires motor coordination, playing basketball, playing baseball, playing lacrosse, playing high-lie, whatever. Ping pong, tennis, you have to learn the tasks, and that's known as skill training, skill learning. Taking out a carburetor, how in the world do lefty, loosey, righty, tighty, I guess you got to remember which ways.
This is German, and
There
it's
we go.
the other way.
Yes, exactly. Priming, and what was it? We were in Germany, and our car broke down, or we had a flat tire, so we had to loosen the lug nuts, of course. And then on German cars, on the left side of the car, it goes counterclockwise. But on the right side of the car, it goes clockwise. I know. And we didn't know that. We didn't realize that. We had never run into that before. In the United States, you don't do that. In the United States, they all unscrew in the same direction. But in Germany, on one side of the car, it's one direction. And of course, here I am, I'm muscling this thing. It's on the right side of the car, and I'm muscling this thing, and all I'm doing is tightening the thing up. And this German came and stopped, and he, called me all kinds of stupid. And then I know, Germans, they think Americans are the dumbest people in the world. Priming is another type of learning. Exposure to a stimulus facilitates subsequent responses to the same or similar stimulus. So if we know, well, it's like loosening the lug nut on a car. If you know how to do it on an American car, then potentially it's the same way on a German car, except in that case it was backwards. They don't do that anymore in Germany. They don't have the lug nuts going in a different direction. Conditioning is that an individual comes to associate two stimuli or a stimulus and a response, and that is known as conditioning. And we do condition ourselves. We see a select individual and we smile at them. So the next time we see them, we smile at them again, because we have been conditioned that every time we see this person, we smile. If you've ever seen me around my wife, you know, I just can't stop smiling. I don't know why. There's something going on there. We won't talk about sex. So every time I see her, I just get the biggest smile on my face you ever saw. If she walked in the room right now, you wouldn't recognize me.
We have to stand at attention.
I don't stand at attention in front of my wife. I'm not that part of my bio.
Oh.
There is there we go, yeah. Okay. There is a degree of attention going on. Edward Tolman has hypothesized through research with rats that they create a cognitive map in their minds from experience. And we do the same thing. Where was I? I was down in South America with, it was a Fulbright trip, and I took it with all of these Native Americans. Well, one of the guys was a Lakota from Standing Rock. He taught at, wait a minute, what's his name? Come on, the Lakota chief, the healer. Sitting Bull College.
Oh.
He's from Sitting Bull College. Anyway, really nice guy. He was a golfer. He was such an interesting fella. Anyway, we were the only two physical people on the whole trip. So anytime we saw a pyramid or whatever, we wanted to climb up the pyramid. And we did. We were just running up and down, acting like little kids, as stupid as that is. But we were at Machu Picchu, and we got behind, there's a mountain, Huayna Picchu is right behind Machu Picchu. That's the tall mountain behind it. And we went onto the mountain. And of course you wind around and around and around, and you just twist around so many times you have no clue where you are. But he always knew where he was. He had this amazing cognitive map. And he said, and even though it was a cloudy day, you couldn't tell east from west and north from south, he always knew where he was. It was just the most amazing thing. He had this really amazing cognitive map. If you've ever been to Germany, if you've ever driven around Germany, Germany isn't square. It goes around mountains. Yeah, exactly. And you never know where you are. So, you can't turn left and end up.
Oh, not the same.
You can't end up where you think you're going to end up. You'll end up, in France or something. But he always knew where he was. He was just the most amazing fellow. No matter where we were, no matter what mountains we were on, he always knew where he was. Just a fabulous guy, really cool guy. I don't know what he's doing now. Tolman was also able to prove that his rats had knowledge that unless tested could not be discounted. This knowledge he referred to as latent learning. Latent means hidden. Freud used to talk about people who were actually gay and didn't know that they were, or weren't overtly gay. And he referred to it as latent homosexuality. In other words, they were actually gay, but they didn't, either it was subconscious and they didn't talk about it, or they didn't know it. They were referred to as latent homosexuals. A lot of times, of course, this was a very repressed sexual time. Individuals who were latent homosexuals, a lot of times they were very aggressive against other homosexuals. They would punish them for no reason. In reality, they were punishing themselves for their own ideas.
Like Hitler?
I'm sorry?
Like Hitler?
Like Hitler, yeah, well, we're not really sure about what's going on with Hitler.
Well, he was, I think he went both ways. 'Cause he died for committing suicide. He shot his so-called mistress.
Right.
And he shot himself.
Yeah, well, he took the pill too.
But he was also freaking mental.
You know, a lot of that's propaganda, and I'm not really sure what's true and what's not true as far as Hitler's concerned. I mean, it's the same way with any world leader. You know, we get all this negative information. A lot of it's just propaganda. It's not really true at all. You know, one of the propaganda things that they used to talk about Hitler was that he liked to have women defecate on his head.
Yeah, I never heard that.
Yeah, okay, that's.
But I know he was part Jewish though. He was actually-
See, that's another part of the propaganda.
No, his mother was
Yeah, I know.
not
I
like
know.
cold, but she was
Yeah.
part.
But we don't know if that's, well, I don't know if that's propaganda or not. It's, you know, they tell these stories as if they are real stories. And I understand what you're talking about. I've read all the stuff that you're talking about. But I just don't know if it's true or not. We hear too much propaganda. But, of course, that we used to have a really serious problem with, even the concept of homosexuality. There were a lot of actors who were gay, but they couldn't be overtly gay because then nobody would go to their movies. Homosexuality was against the law in a lot of states in the United States. It was.
You can go to jail for it?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, you go to jail for sodomy. Yeah, they would arrest you for sodomy.
Oh.
And this was around what time?
1940s, 1950s, 1960s. And now, of course, we're finding out that, we always knew that they were gay, but we never said anything about it. People like Van Johnson was gay. Rock Hudson, obviously.
The dad on Brady Bunch.
Yeah, the father on the Brady Bunch. And of course, he didn't want anybody to know it because then he wouldn't be able to get any jobs. And of course, nobody would watch the Brady Bunch because the father was gay. Why are we talking? Oh, Leighton, that's all. Coleman later wrote that different kinds of learning may follow different laws, and that's Edward Coleman. You know, there he is, the lovely fellow. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. Let's see if we can make this thing work. There we go. Okay, one more. Come on, one more. Okay. Iconic memory is a brief memory of an image, icon. So it's memory of an image. It's part of your short-term memory. Another part of your short-term memory is echoic memory. That is the memory of a sound. So if you're listening to what I'm saying, try to speak in sentences. Usually I do. I do fairly well, which is interesting. I was standing around with Patrick Blackwater and Marius Begay and Jeremiah Barber the other day, and we were talking to each other, and somebody didn't finish their sentence. It was Jeremiah, and he had the wrong verb. Okay, so here we're all faculty, and we're all grading papers, of course, and he changed his sentence. He had to go back and change his sentence. It was really kind of interesting to listen to somebody correct themselves like that. And I'll do that myself if I use the wrong verb. Anyway, so if you're listening to what I'm saying, you're hearing the beginning of the sentence and you hear the end of the sentence. But you have to remember what you heard in the beginning of the sentence for the end of the sentence to make any sense. And that's known as echoic memory. Now, you don't have to remember everything. It's not like you remember every conversation you've ever had. But you need to remember for about 30 seconds. And of course, that's part of your short-term memory. Short-term memory is iconic, echoic, or cognitive memory that lasts for about 30 seconds. And it lasts for 30 seconds. It's like trying to remember a telephone number. You remember it, you rehearse it in your mind, Somebody gave me the code to the classrooms on the 3rd floor.
What does it mean if unrehearsed?
I'm sorry?
What does that mean if unrehearsed?
If unrehearsed, it means if I gave you my telephone number, 563-503-0524, the probability of you remembering all 10 of those numbers in the right sequence without repeating it over in your mind would be fairly remote. I mean, we're talking about 10 different telephone numbers, or 10 different numbers.
Well,
Okay, so if you don't repeat it to if you don't rehearse it in your mind, you're gonna forget it. But if you rehearse it twice, it takes 3 times. If you hear something 3 times, you'll remember it. Okay? So you have to rehearse it. And if you don't rehearse it, it goes away in about 30 seconds. Do you remember my telephone number? I just gave you my...
503 is our...
563-503-0524. 3 5s in my telephone number. Of course, it's Iowa, so 563. And that's the east side of Iowa, not around Des Moines. Not important. But see, all this has to do with rehearsing. So if you rehearse it in your mind, you can remember the telephone number. Now what happens is, because we have so much to remember, that a lot of times when we rehearse something, we transpose the numbers, we get them out of sequence. And that happens all the time, unfortunately. What was I talking? Oh, the guy came to read my gas meter the other day. And my gas meter was 1953. Well, that's a date. So if you think of it as 1953, it's not so hard to remember. But if you try to remember 1953, it's not as easy to remember. Okay, so we like to chunk things together. So you have to rehearse things. And if you don't, it'll only last for about 30 seconds. Intermediate term memory, some psychologists refer to memories that may last longer than short-term memory for an hour, for a day. I'm still trying to remember the code of that classroom upstairs. But it's not put in long-term memory, but you remember it for a couple days. And usually that's the way you try to remember if you have to take a final. I don't have, all my finals are online, you don't have to worry about it. But I know Marius gives his finals during finals week. Yeah. So if you've got finals, you try to remember that stuff, but you don't try to put it in long-term memory. Sometimes it gets stuck in long-term memory anyway, but otherwise it just goes in there and then it goes away, and you'll keep it for about for a day or for an hour or whatever. And that's known as intermediate term memories. Long-term memory, of course, is permanent, and it stays in your brain forever. It's in there someplace. All you have to do is figure out what the right cue is, and you can go in and find that information. The capacities of long-term memory are almost limitless. Research shows that college students can recognize 50,000 different words. That is changing. It's declining because college students aren't reading. Or they're smoking dope. People who learn a second language acquire 100,000 items of knowledge, and so since both of you speak Navajo,
I don't.
You don't.
I speak 3 languages. Navajo's not one of them.
Not and one
English,
of
Spanish, and Arabic.
Okay, Spanish, English, and
Arabic.
Arabic. Oh, okay. Ooh, Arabic's tough. Yeah.
A little bit of Dari, a little bit of Pashto.
Wow, that's Afghanistan. I had a friend from northern Afghanistan, and she spoke Dari. She called it Darcy, like Farsi.
It's short. Yeah, we had to take like a 3-week course through Rosetta Stone, but like it was through like CENTCOM. So we had, man, it was nuts, man.
Intense, wasn't it?
You want?
Yeah.
How about, so people who learn a second language acquire 100,000 items of knowledge.
Right.
Does does that have anything to do with people that, like, is English their second language?
Yeah, because they already know another language. A lot of times they'll tie the two together,
Okay.
which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. You can't tie English to Japanese, for example, because, well, the letters are different. I mean, the iconic, they use pictographs and we use Roman letters, or Arabic letters. They're kind of the same.
Oh, Arabic writing is like fucking nuts.
Yeah,
It's like a bunch of squiggles, man.
Yeah, I see.
And they read right to left.
right.
It's crazy.
Hebrew's the same way.
Yeah.
Right to left. Memory traces. A memory trace is a path that the memory how it has been placed in long-term memory. So a lot of times the cues that you use to get this information out goes through some really strange corridors. You remember things. You have to find that memory trace in order to figure that out. Of course, if you're on Jeopardy, you're trying to remember all of this information. If your cues are right there, and the memory trace is relatively short, then you're going to do much better on Jeopardy.
How those people do it on Jeopardy? They just sit and just study, read books?
That's one way to do it, and that way it gets into your, the memory trace is really short. If you just read a lot of information, and that's one way to do it. Other individuals, of course, they just have that information anyway, but the memory trace is a little bit longer, and they lose on Jeopardy. It's the people with eidetic memories. They're the ones that do really well on Jeopardy. The guy I guess there's a guy that broke the record, and now he just won I don't know, they had some kind of a championship this year. I guess Alex Trebek is dying, so he has prostate cancer.
Yeah, he's been on there for a minute.
Yeah. The more severe the damage to the medial temporal lobe, the more impaired the ability to establish new memories. Work with people with hippocampal damage shows that the hippocampus is probably the final location of memory formation. These individuals can still support some degree of cortex memory formation, but it is the hippocampus, and we know that. One system includes there are three neural memory systems. One of them includes the hippocampus. This system acquires information about relationships among stimuli and events, and this is known as declarative memories. So you remember things that had to do with things that you are observing.
How about people that have Alzheimer's?
Yes.
They don't remember anything.
Well, yeah, but they're
It's like a little
losing.
short, isn't it?
Right, they're losing their acetylcholine producing cells, and that's where your
okay.
memory comes from. The neurotransmitter that is utilized in memory is acetylcholine, and they're losing that capability. We have lots of acetylcholine all over our system. It makes us move, it allows us to move, and it allows us to remember.
So will having a TBI distort that a little bit?
It shouldn't, depending on where the damage is. If the damage, the hippocampus is right in the middle of the brain, as you can see. Normally, if you have a TBI, it's on the periphery. It's on the outside. It's on the left side, it's on the right side, it's on the top. But it rarely gets to this place. I mean, this is right in the middle of your brain. It's protected by everything else, by all the other mass of your brain.
Even if it moves a little bit,
You mean,
your brain?
well, I mean, the damage would have to go all the way to the middle of your brain.
Oh,
You'd almost have
actually,
to lose, you'd have to lose a whole hemisphere of your brain to
Yeah.
get to your hippocampus. So the probability of losing that portion is not very high. However, you can damage it. You can damage the hippocampus to some extent. I mean, if the left or right side of your brain has been damaged, then potentially that you'll lose a select portion of your hippocampus. People with PTSD, we have done studies, and what we have determined is that people with PTSD have a smaller hippocampus than people that don't have PTSD. What does PTSD do to it? It has to do with stress. It's 8% less. It's 8% smaller for people with PTSD. We're going to talk about that maybe if we get that far. See, I seem to be going pretty slow. There's a system that includes the dorsal striatum. This system mediates the formation of reinforced stimulus-response associations, such as habits or non-declarative memories. As you can see, it's right in the middle of the brain as well. So all of your memory, the essence of your knowledge is right in the middle of your brain. This is all part of the reptilian brain, strangely enough. There's a system that includes the amygdala. And the amygdala, of course, the hippocampus, the amygdala is right on the end of the hippocampus, as you can see. And this has to do with emotions. This is how we respond to emotions. This system mediates rapid acquisition of behaviors on the basis of biologically significant events with effective properties. And that's one of the reasons why we try to get you, the best way for us to teach you something is to get you excited about it, is to make you laugh. If we can engender emotions, then you're more likely to remember what we're talking about. And that's the amygdala. And that's part of your memory system. If you can tie a piece of information to something that's very emotional, and it's one of the reasons why PTSD is so prevalent. Usually you are trained in the military to not respond emotionally to things, but of course select episodes being shot at is pretty damn scary. Yeah, and it makes you angry, and then you remember all that stuff. You can't forget it, it's just there, and it won't go away. And of course, they have new techniques that they have tried to use in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars that haven't worked. They were attempts to make people to not tie information to emotions. So there was a medication that they theoretically gave you after you came back. They gave you a pill, and that was supposed to keep you from getting PTSD. So, and it's one of the reasons why they dealt with the war the way that they dealt with it.
I don't know, after my first tour, we had small arms contact, right? They sent like the whole squad of freaking combat strays. I'm like, what the heck am I talking to you for? We're infantry, it's our job.
Right.
Well, I think these people were bored because they just stood there. I saw one playing Xbox. I mean, what kind of freaking tour is that? Playing Xbox.
Yeah, the idea is being in the same, on the video screen, being in the same situation as you were in real life, but it's not dangerous. I mean, even if you get shot, you don't die, in the video game. And theoretically, it's supposed to dissipate your PTSD, and it works on some people. Especially works on individuals who play a lot of video games, who kind of live in two different worlds anyway, of the real world and then this fantasy world that they create. Do you play video games? Okay. It works for those guys. It really works for them. But it seems kind of silly to me to live in two worlds, the real world and the fantasy world. Researchers have found that animals who catch food have neurons in their hippocampus that are activated when they get into a particular location or they have cached food. I've lived all over the United States, Oklahoma City, Mississippi, Columbus, Mississippi, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles. We lived in Northridge, and then we lived in Riverside. Where else did we live? Montana. I can go anywhere. I have this cognitive map of all these roads because I've driven all over the United States. Lived in Nebraska, lived in Iowa. My God, I've lived everywhere. Texas 3 times, 4 times. Lubbock, Texas, I can get you around Lubbock, Texas. Oklahoma City is the biggest miasma you ever saw. Their roads are just insane. They don't mark them. The people in, I know, it's stupid. But I lived there for 4 years, and I can get around Oklahoma City without getting lost, which is kind of amazing. Oklahoma City is a bunch of little towns that are stuck together. War Acres and what's it, Crooked Oak, and just a bunch of little towns. Anyway, and each of them has their own road system. Why are we talking about this? We're talking about particular locations. So if I go to Nebraska, I lived in Nebraska for almost 10 years. If I go to Omaha, I can get you around Omaha because, I live there. So I have a memory of Omaha. So if I get close and I see something, oh, that McDonald's has been there for 50 years. I know where I am. It's just the same way with these animals. When they get near an area, they fly into a valley and they get near this tree where they have hidden food, the memory comes back and they know where that food is. Well, it's the same way with me. I know where all the McDonald's are in Omaha. Okay, these neurons are referred to as place cells, and of course, the more you've moved around, and potentially, it really all depends on where you've been in your life. These spatial view cells are seen in the larger hippocampuses of birds who cache food, but of course, it's the same way with us. I've never really driven around to Albuquerque, I just know the base, Kirtland. Gallup, I can get you around Gallup, well, only this side of Gallup. The other side of Gallup I have no clue about. But if you've been there and you've driven around, Lubbock, Texas, nobody goes to Lubbock. Jeez, it's the shittiest place you ever it's on tape, isn't it? When information is properly encoded, there are 2 areas of the brain that are activated when the memory is remembered. The prefrontal cortex is one of them, and the parahippocampal cortex is the other. And this is the parahippocampal cortex, as you can see. It wanders around it's the front part of the hippocampus, and that's your prefrontal cortex.
How do you say
Parahippocampal?
I like that.
Yeah, para just means in the front. So it's the front portion of the hippocampus. Words are remembered in the left prefrontal cortex and the left hemisphere of the parahippocampal cortex, and this is one of the reasons why if you get hit in the head, especially if you get hit in the front of the head, one of the things we're going to do is try to figure out if you can see okay. We're going to hold up 2 fingers and say, how many fingers am I holding up? And so we're going to test 2 things there. We're going to test your vision because you have to be able to count to 2. And the other thing is you have to understand what I'm saying. And then you have to say to me, you have 2 fingers holding up, or how many fingers are you holding up? 2. And you have to say the word 2, and you have to understand that I just asked you how many fingers am I holding up. Okay, so we're testing 2 things at the same time. We're testing your vision, and we're also testing whether you understand language. Why? Because this is where we interpret words, on the left side of our brains. So if somebody gets hit on the right side of the front of your head, if you get a blow to the right side of your head, the probability of you losing your ability to understand words is fairly remote. But if you get hit on this side of your head, then potentially it's like I'm speaking a foreign language to you and you don't understand. You hear the noise, but you can't really interpret what I'm saying. I've been hit in the head, that didn't sound right. I've had blows to my head where music didn't sound like music anymore. Okay, that was weird. That was really strange because I would, turn on the radio and a song would come on, and it just sounded like it sounded like noise. Exactly.
I've had 3 concussions. Doctor said 1 more like that.
Well, I guess the TBI, does the TBI count?
Well, I used to box, and back when I was doing the game bang thing, I hit the head with a crowbar. And then the boxing thing, and then
The TBI, yeah. Ugly stuff. The hippocampal system is not a repository of long-term memory. Permanent storage is thought to occur in regions of the neocortex where the information is first processed and held in short-term memory. So that's where we can find that information. But, of course, we have to come up with the right cue. This information is further processed in the medial temporal region, but this area is not the location of long-term memory either. It's merely an area of consolidation. So where does all of our memory come from? If we map it out, it's all over our brains. It's all over our neocortex. That's where this piece of information is. They've done surgery where they have gone into the brain and they have stimulated a select portion of the brain. And over here is, you remember your girlfriend from the 3rd grade, and if you stimulate over here, you remember falling out of a tree when you were 5 years old. It's just all over the place. It all depends on where you where you consolidated that information as to where it is. It's all, in essence, it's all over the brain. So it's not like you can, you're trying to remember a question on Jeopardy. You can push your skull right here and remember it. It just doesn't work that way, because you never know where it's going to end up. Imaging research has verified 2 regions of the brain used to establish declarative memory: the medial temporal lobe and the diencephalic system. Imaging of the brain shows activation in both encoding of new material and retrieval of that information. You encode it in a select place, we have to retrieve it in exactly the same place. And the trick is to figure out what the cue is. Encoding takes place in the rostral regions of the hippocampal area. That's the back portion. Retrieving episodic memory are located primarily in the caudal portions of the hippocampus. That's right in the middle. And there are the 2 most beautiful women, or twins in the world. They're getting older, and they're not as pretty as they used to be. But when they were young, somebody saw them and took a picture of them, and they were declared the 2 most gorgeous creatures on earth. I don't know if you agree with it. It doesn't really matter. They don't quite look as pretty as they did before. If you don't like blondes, you don't like blue-eyed individuals, then I guess you're not going to think they're very attractive. Looking at models of encoding and retrieval of the same information, researchers and theorists ponder if the 2 systems aren't identical, and this is known as a memory trace. What we're trying to do is create a memory trace. Do you find them attractive? They're models. They were models when they were tiny little people, and now they're like 10 or 12 years old. They don't.
How long ago was this picture?
This picture, this is about 4 years ago.
Oh.
It's like the Olsen twins, man. They go cracked out.
Yeah, geez. They were kind of cute when they were little and chunky, when they had a little bit of meat on their face. Now they just look like lizards or something. Maybe these 2 will turn out to be lizards. What happens to somebody when you tell them that they're the most gorgeous people in the world? What kind of ego? Yeah, exactly. Their brains are probably...
Take it fucking huge, man.
Same thing that happened to the Olsen twins, probably. We'll see what happens. There are 3 types of skill memory that researchers have delved into to discover brain areas involved in them: sensory motor skills, perceptual skills, and cognitive skills. Thinking, recognizing, and sensory motor has to do with just reacting to stimuli. Imaging of people performing skills from memory show that there are 3 areas activated in the process: the basal ganglia, the cerebellum, and the motor neocortex. Motor neocortex is right on top of the brain. The basal ganglia is the reptilian brain, and of course the cerebellum in the back. This has to do with remembering how to fix a carburetor. What happened over the weekend? I chopped a limb off of a tree. It was falling off of a tree, and I chopped it off. Well, I'm really good with an axe, only because I've done it a lot. If you're a city boy, then you probably, why in the world would you ever wield an axe? But coming from the country, where I lived in a forest, We cut wood all the time, and I like to cut wood with an axe. I got really good at using
So
an axe.
if you don't do it for like a long time, like me, I haven't touched a weapon. But I guarantee, blindfolded, I could put it back
Muscle
together.
memory, it's muscle memory, and of course it's gonna work. Now, the probability is, I was looking at National Geographic, and they showed pictures of African soldiers, and I was looking at their weapons, and I was thinking, those are fairly simple. The AK-47 is a really simple weapon. You can break that thing down in a nanosecond.
Yeah, but it's not really accurate.
It's not very accurate at all, because it's such a simple.
It's a sprayer, that's all it is.
Yeah.
But it'll get the point across.
Well, I mean, bullets are bullets. Anyway, I was thinking, geez, I could take those things apart. I've never even seen those guns before.
With an M4, you have it right here. And you take out the thing, it comes out, you take off the handguards and everything, boom, that's that. And then you have the hammer, and you got your firing pin and all that. There's about 9 major parts.
See, the M16 was a different weapon. The AR-15, the M4 that you guys used, much simpler weapon, a much more accurate weapon,
Well,
a lot more compact.
yeah, because we bring the fight to them versus fighting over there.
No.
M16, it's, you could get some yardage on that.
Yeah, it's made out of plastic anyway. Amnesia, severe memory is severe memory impairment, but it's seldom complete. Usually if you forget things, you don't forget everything. Retrograde amnesia is where you can't remember things that happened to you in the past. So everything behind you can't remember. You can make new memories, but you can't remember what happened to you in the past. Anterograde amnesia is the opposite. You can remember the past, but you can't make new memories, as weird as that sounds. So you have retrograde amnesia, where you can't remember who you are or what happened in the past, and then anterograde, you can't make new memories. When HM was 16 years old, he developed seizures. By age 27, the seizures were so bad that he had to quit work. Medication could no longer control his problem. A neurosurgeon determined that both temporal lobes were involved. He excised most of the anterior temporal lobe, the amygdala, and the hippocampus in both hemispheres of his brain. Okay, so he's taken away all this kid's memory. He can't remember anything from 10 years before his operation, and this, of course, is retrograde amnesia. That portion of his brain where all that information was being stored is now gone. So he can't remember 10 years before his operation. He only has short-term memory and can't establish any long-term memories, and this is anterograde amnesia. So what they've done is they have saved the guy's life, but now he can't form new memories, and he can't remember the past. So, and of course, this is a question that medical people have to ask themselves whenever something happens to somebody. You have to ask that individual. Or you have to ask yourself, what am I creating here? Am I creating a glob of humanity that will have no purpose for the rest of their lives? When we were in Germany in the late 70s, early 80s, there were a lot of suicides over there for some reason. There were a lot of drugs. It was a mess. Anyway, we had this one guy that jumped off of a building, and he lost the whole front part of his face. It was all gone. And the only thing that was there was his bottom jaw. And he had taken off his nose and his eyes, and the top part of his head was gone, but he was still alive. And this guy was doing okay. It was the weirdest thing in the world. I mean, his frontal cortex was gone, his eyes were gone, his nose was gone. He was pretty much just a breathing tube. That's all that was left. His cerebellum was still there, but the whole front part of his head was gone. But he was still alive. And of course, the doctors are working on him, trying to keep him alive. And this old doctor from World War, he wasn't really from World War II. He'd been in the concentration camps during World War II. And he came over and he said, "What the hell are you doing?" And the doctor said, "Well, I'm trying to save his life." And the old doctor said, "Why? For what? There's, what are you?"
There's no point, huh?
Yeah, what are you saving? I mean, what's his life going to be? All he has is a brain stem and a cerebellum. He's got
Jellyfish.
the memory portion of his brain is all gone, and he tried to commit suicide anyway. So the old guy went over and he got a wet washcloth and he put it over his breathing, his esophagus, and he drowned, or he died, he asphyxiated. It's just a question that you have to ask yourself. Why are you doing this? What does it mean? And I would ask the same question to this guy. He can't make new memories, and he can't remember the past, so
He's just pretty much living minute by minute.
he's just a vegetable. He can't remember anybody. Anyway. There are two types of memory: declarative memory and procedural memory. Declarative memory represents information acquired by learning. These are this is Trivial Pursuit, do your declarative memory. Procedural memory has to do with people knowing that they can show by doing. It's like, I show you how to set the camera up, and that's a procedure. That's procedural memory. I know how to set the camera up. I know how to download stuff, and you have to do a sequence of things. It's working on a computer. You turn the thing on, you type in your password, then you have to know where to take your icon. You have to know how to move the icon around in order to know what you're doing. And that's all procedural memory. HM could not form new declarative memories, but he could form new procedural memories, as weird as that sounds. So it's almost like we have an OCD portion of our brain, and that's how we remember things, or the most important things about us. And I keep talking about the middle of the brain. This is what I'm talking about. This is the basal ganglia. This is the very center of your brain. And of course, he still had his cerebellum intact. I can't remember why I put that one up there. After HM's case became widely known, cases of similar results came to the attention of the medical community. We had never thought about it before, but if you catch herpes simplex, if it gets into your brain, if it's genital herpes, this stuff will erode portions of your body, and that can destroy your medial temporal lobe, causing similar results. Ischemia is reduced blood flow to the brain, as in the case of a stroke or a heart attack. It can damage the medial temporal lobe and cause the same results. No memory, retrograde, and anterograde amnesia. Encephalitis is an inflammation of the brain. This used to be relatively common, encephalitis. Now, of course, we know how to treat it, so it rarely destroys portions of the brain. But if you look at turn of the 20th century, lots of encephalitis. Not only did we have an outbreak of the flu, which killed more people than died in World War I, but we also had an outbreak of encephalitis that destroyed people's brains. They were still alive, didn't kill them, but it made them so they were non-functional. So we had a lot of really strange things going on. Well, let's damage somebody else. NA was messing around with a miniature foil. This is a miniature foil. As you can see, it's a really thin piece of metal that you fence with. Somehow the sword entered his nostril and skewered him through the sinus cavities and into his diencephalon. I know. I'm trying to scratch my nose.
Aren't those like small enough to where it can't get through the thing?
Well, no. You can make punch a hole through your sinuses.
No, but I'm saying the guard that they use with fencing.
Oh, yeah,
Isn't it
sure,
small
yeah,
enough where-
I'm thinking he didn't have his mask on or something. Or he's just playing with it, he stuck it up his nose and somebody hit his arm. You know how funny that is. when that happens.
Yes, no, that doesn't sound.
The injury damaged the dorsal-medial thalamus, destroyed the mammillary body, and created a lesion on his hypothalamus that destroyed 2/3 of the organ. So it just went up through here. That's all it did, and it destroyed the mammillary bodies. It also destroyed his hypothalamus, which is right there. Okay, it destroyed 2/3 of it. It's not a very big piece of metal, but you know, you stick it up through your brain, and all of a sudden you got pieces missing. NA suffered anterograde amnesia.
Can't, yeah.
NA's short-term memory was intact, but his declarative memory was absent, though he had procedural memory. Of course, he had procedural memory, doing things in sequence. That comes from a lot of different areas of your brain. Okay, let's talk about getting drunk. Korsakoff syndrome is a profound amnesia associated with chronic use of alcohol. Alcohol is very destructive. There is a deterioration in the diencephalon, the hippocampus, the amygdala, and some of the frontal cortex. The problem is that the liver is so busy processing alcohol because you're drinking so much of that
So they
stuff.
call wet brain?
Yeah, this is wet brain. It doesn't do a proper job processing vitamins, and especially vitamin B1, also known as thiamine. So you're not processing thiamine correctly, and that's where all of these problems come from. These guys are interesting. Chronic alcoholics will often display a marked retrograde amnesia. They can't remember the past, don't ask them any questions, they get angry, they start getting agitated, they can become violent because they can't remember anything. Curiously, alcoholics will often fill in the missing information with fantastic stories that are either constructed from their stuporous, inebriated state or suggested by someone else. They'll take anything else that anybody else says as the gospel. It is weird. You can get them to repeat just about anything. This is what the wet brain you're talking about. This fantasy memory is known as confabulation. It is the strangest thing in the world. So if somebody's a good alcoholic, a really good alcoholic, and they've been drinking a lot of alcohol for an extended length of time, their brains have deteriorated because they're not processing vitamin B1. And they get sores in their mouths, and they also have this confabulation, this little lack of memory. And this is known as Korsakoff syndrome. Work by Estonian scientist Endel Tolving led to the bifurcation of declarative memory, facts and information, into two different types. There's semantic memory, which is generalized information, that's the trivial pursuit. Episodic memory is autobiographical memory that makes up an individual's personal history. So if you think about, you've got lots of information coming in, but you also know about your own memory, you know about your own history. And that is episodic memory, and all the other crap that you remember is all semantic memory. Casey sustained brain injuries due to a traffic accident. After the accident, Casey suffered damage to the frontal parietal cerebral cortex, damage to the right parietal occipital cerebral cortex, severe shrinkage to the hippocampus, severe shrinkage of the parahippocampal cortex. As you can see, there's a skull fracture. Ouch. Which usually kills you, but in this case it didn't. A lot of times it kills you. Due to the damage, Casey lost his ability to recall episodic, his autobiographical memories. Casey still maintains semantic memory but can't remember who he is. He can't remember any autobiographical information, but he can learn new things. The problem seems to be in the...
He doesn't know who he is?
I'm sorry?
His name?
He doesn't know who he is. Isn't that fun? The problem seems to be in the damage to the cortex, not the damage to his hippocampus. Researchers feel that it is the frontal parietal damage that causes his loss of memory, and the loss of memory in this case is the fact he can't remember who he is. The temporal aspect of memory, memory can be divided into two structured stages, iconic and echoic memory. Initial presentation of a stimulus arrives in the brain as a momentary stimulation that can readily disappear. And of course, this is what happens when we see something, you don't remember it, maybe you do remember it tomorrow, or maybe you think you remember it, or you hear something and you remember it for the short term. Short-term memory is iconic or echoic memory that individual seeks to maintain. This may last for a minute or so if you rehearse it, if you repeat it over and over again. How many times do you have to repeat it to yourself? You have to hear this information 3 times. If you hear it 3 times, you can put it into your long-term memory. If you only hear it once, then you'll probably forget it. Intermediate memory, short-term memory that you are able to hold because of novel subject or that is readily organized in the brain, such as a weather report. Does anybody know what it's supposed to snow?
Who knows?
Friday, I think.
Well, I got a question. Okay, so I haven't fought in a long time, okay? But you know, us being Rangers, we kill men, you know, but like, if I got in a fight and all stuff first come back, which would that fall under? Long term?
You mean, it's all muscle memory. That would be all
So
muscle.
none of that?
Probably not. Well, if somebody attacked you right now and you defended yourself, just like you used to defend yourself back when you were in the military, that would all be muscle memory. It's like, have you ever seen any of the Jason Bourne movies?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, he doesn't know who he is, he can't remember anything, and then these guys attack him, and all of a sudden he just dispatches all of them. If I remember correctly, somebody's got a gun on him, and he pulls the gun out of his hand, and he jacks the barrel off. And he just does this, and he doesn't know why he did that. If you remember the very first Jason Bourne movie, yeah, it's kind of interesting. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, sure. So if somebody made this stupid mistake of trying to jump you or something, you would defend yourself just like you did when you were in the Rangers. And it's all muscle memory. It's all automatic.
Corey asked me, well, how do you fight them all? I don't know.
Yeah.
I just do it. I don't freaking
Exactly.
have time to think about it.
Oh, sure.
You know?
Because it all became muscle memory. And it's not something you think about, it's just something that you do.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Long-term memory, short-term duration memory that is placed in a more permanent area of the cerebral cortex where it may be recalled days, months, or even years after the fact. And permanent memory, of course, lasts for a lifetime. Long-term memory can be accomplished using several techniques. Skill learning, challenging tasks over several sessions. Priming, stimuli that is altered due to previous exposure to the same or similar stimuli. If you've only heard or seen something one time, the second time you hear it, you're priming that information, and you're more likely to remember it the second time. So if somebody shows you how to do something new on the computer, the first time you see it, you probably won't remember it. If they show it to you twice, then probably you're going to remember it. But I can assure you that you will remember it if you try to show somebody else how to do it. Because now you put this in your memory 3 times. You've been shown how to do it, you demonstrated that you could do it, and now you have taught somebody else how to do it. And that's how they teach doctors how to be doctors. DOs, doctors of osteopathy. They tell them what to do, they show that they can do it, and then they teach somebody else how to do it. And at that point, it's in your permanent memory because you've seen it 3 times. And now that's all you need is the 3 times. And this is known as priming. So the first time you do it, of course, you're shown how to do it. The second time you do it, now you're primed. That information is in there. And that's one of the reasons why I have multiple choice questions If you know the information, the right answer is there, and the fact that it is in there is priming you to remember this information. So let's assume that you've learned that information the first time, and now that you've taken the test, that's 2 times that you've seen this information. Now it's in your long-term memory. They have just recently done studies. They came out a couple of months ago. People have been saying, oh, multiple choice questions aren't any good. People need to be able to recall it from, fill in the blank type memory.
That's harder, man.
It is harder.
It is.
And the reason is because it's not primed. But if I want to teach you something, I should, it's like giving somebody an IQ test. That's not what we're doing here. I just want you to remember this stuff.
If you give multiple choice, at least we know, like, okay, well, we know for sure it's not this one.
Right, you have to analyze it in order to remember it. Exactly, exactly. So you're not just thinking of the right answer, you're also looking and identifying the wrong answer. And for that reason, multiple choice questions are actually the best way to remember things. And of course, I've been doing this forever. I'm a genius, of course, I know already.
Yes, we know that.
Yeah. No, I always thought that this was the best way to teach people, and it turns out that I was right. Blind luck, actually. It's more blind luck than anything else. Okay. So that's priming, and that's a really good way to learn things. Conditioning, tying a stimulus response to a reward or punishment. I used to have a student that would he would study while he was listening to music. And then he would just replay that music in his mind, and he would remember everything that he was trying to learn. As weird as that is. Before that he started doing this, he was a DC student. After he started doing this, he was an A student.
As I do, I listen to music.
It's not a bad way to remember things.
No, it calms me down.
Oh, it calms you down.
I don't listen to choreo time.
That's one way to do it. I have to listen to opera. As weird as that sounds.
You know what? When I was a teenager, my squad would trip out on me. As we go outside the wire, I would play Pavarotti.
Ah.
They're like, man, dang, so that's some like serial killer shit. I'm out. Let's go. It depends on my mood. Sometimes I play Pavarotti, sometimes I play AC/DC, sometimes I'll play freaking Zeppelin, sometimes I'll play some freaking Tupac. Depends on my mood.
Sure.
But if it's really important, I play some Pavarotti or.
Now, why in the world would Pavarotti be better than Led Zeppelin or Tupac? Why would Pavarotti, if it was something really important that was really complex, why would Pavarotti be better?
Because it's more calm. It's more, I guess, in a way, precise.
Precise is the exact thing. It has to do with organization.
Because being an operator, that's what you're doing. You're actually operating, and just like doctors who have a body on the floor, they know what you gotta do. There's a certain way you gotta do it.
It's very organized. It's an organized music. A lot of rap music is not organized.
Well, I don't know.
It gets you stimulated.
This is more East Coast than with West Coast. It's just a lot of bass and everything. East Coast, they have more violins and stuff like that. Seriously, there's like a big difference.
I've got a video for you. You'll think it's fun.
Like when we sit in our office at the ASDC office. So there's 3 of us. We always come together and we write out an agenda for our meetings. And the only way they concentrate, I think you met her, Jessica, the other day. She came into the classroom, but she listens to country, and that's what keeps her motivated right now.
I like country, but I mean, dang, dude, it's like someone left them, a dog died, or they spilled barbecue sauce on their shirt or something.
It's time to cry.
But yeah, she listens to country. That's what.
It's less organized. And that's the reason people listen to classical music. It's more organized.
I like oldies too.
Research indicates that every time a memory is called up, there is potential for distortion. New memories or new information may change the structure of the memory. The structures of questions or memories can further plant false memories. And this is the problem with our memory. We are implanting new information all the time. Sometimes the new information changes the old information. If you have a cell phone that you use, in the old days, before I don't know, when did cell phones come around? I don't know. Anyway, they were attached to the wall. Okay.
Battery
No.
pack was like a suitcase.
Yeah, they were great, they were bricks is what they were. Yeah, before that, they were attached to the wall. But if you have a little experience with the attached to the wall telephones, then you may forget that telephones used to be attached to the wall. When I was stationed in Germany, when my dad was in Germany, of course, that was during World War II, and there were no telephones. And the only way he could get any information back to the States was in a letter. So my dad wrote a lot of letters. When my brother was in Afghanistan, he communicated with his wife every day on the computer. It wasn't Skype. But he would email her and she would email him back. I mean, they would have these conversations. And they were able to do that. But when I was in Germany, there were only a select number of telephones that you could have. So we could only call home every week or every month. I mean, sometimes it was months before we could get through. That was the only communication that we had. We either wrote a letter or we could use the telephone. My dad didn't have any telephones. And now, now if you're in Afghanistan or Iraq, you can communicate with your loved ones every day if you want to. Things have changed.
Yeah, you go to the NWR and they got like phones, they got like computers.
See, that never happened before. When I was in Germany, there was no computers. Of course, there was back in the 80s. And the internet wasn't invented until 1993. But, and Germany only had so many telephone lines. So if you wanted a telephone in your house, you had to wait until somebody died before you could get a telephone. Some German guy.
They're dead. Yeah, I got a line.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I got a phone. This is great stuff. New memories or new information may change the structure of the memory. The pictures of questions and memories can further plant false memories. Some people are quite susceptible to false memories, stories made up by the authorities, and of course this is a problem right now because if you're watching the whole impeachment thing, it looks like Trump is guilty, but if you watch Fox News, that's not what you see. If you listen to what Trump says, the call was perfect, this is a hoax, it's a witch hunt, you believe what you hear. But if you watch other television shows, other news shows, then you get a different information.
Does he own Fox?
No. Fox is owned by Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch is an Englishman.
Okay, does Trump own?
I'm sorry, did I say Englishman? He's an Australian. But he and Rupert Murdoch and Donald Trump are good buddies. Same way with the guy that used to own it's a guy that still owns the National Enquirer. You know, all those rags, that stupid stuff.
Yo, surprised they make a lot of fucking money, man.
Well, that's
Entertainment.
That's what the world's all about now, is making money. Anyway, so some people are really susceptible to misinformation. And of course, these are the individuals that they're targeting, that the Trump people are targeting, because they will believe whatever they hear. And of course, who's got the most authority? Well, the President of the United States does, of course. In one study, 25% of the respondents accepted the false memories. That's an awful lot of people. They did a survey. It was a couple days ago. They did a survey trying to find out who was the best president that has ever existed. Was it Abraham Lincoln or Donald Trump? And the Republicans said, 57% of the Republicans said that Donald Trump was the best president we've ever had in the United States. 57% of the Republicans. And he was up against Abraham Lincoln, who has been an iconic presidential
What's
figure
Totally a fair
since 1865.
comparison.
And they say that he was better than Abraham Lincoln.
Most people were even alive when Lincoln was president.
Well, that may be true, but have you ever seen the Lincoln Memorial? My God, he's huge.
I heard that there's a word that's misspelled on there.
I haven't really looked. There is a word?
Yeah, there's, I don't know what word it is, but yeah, there's a word that's misspelled.
Isn't that fun? Yeah, you gotta love it. The ability of implanting false memories clouds the accuracy of such controversial memory formation as recovered memories of childhood sexual or physical abuse, delivered testimony that has been acquired from intensive questioning in a criminal trial also has questionable accuracy. These are really good. You need to look at those just for fun. One of them is they're throwing a basketball back and forth, and you're concentrating on the basketball, and something happens right in the middle of it, and you don't even see it. It's so bizarre. It's the same way with...
It was the word future in his inaugural address. Yeah, you could tell if you look real close. Yeah, the word future. He put F or EUTURE instead of the F.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, but they covered it though.
Memory is formed around the structure of our senses. Attributes of memory include time, space, sensory perceptions, response, cognitive effect of the stimuli. Each attribute seems to utilize different neural structures. And this is one of the reasons why if, when you had your, when you were in your, when you experienced the IED and had your TBI, you don't remember, probably don't remember a whole hell of a lot that happened. And not only that, but people have told you what you did, and that has become part of your memory. The same thing happened to me. When I hit my head, when I fell out of the helicopter, I don't really remember anything. But people have told me that I turned somersaults in the air. And now I can visualize myself turning somersaults in the air so that I'd land correctly.
What they told me was true because I checked my bag after I got to the hospital and I was missing 3 rounds. So after I flipped over, I fired up 2 shots. I wake up, I'm a freaking alarm.
Yeah. I woke up and I was in right pat. I was at right pat. I didn't have the damage that you have, of course. They weren't exactly sure. They kept saying, well, I was in a coma and I woke up in right pat and they said, well, you don't have any brain damage at all. I don't understand why you're in a coma, that kind of thing. Like I was malingering or something. It's the way the military treats you.
Man, it's big UCMJ action to malingering. What does that even mean?
Yeah, that was my plan, was to fall out of a helicopter and pretend that I was hurt.
Vacation.
From studies of brain imaging and memory, as well as evidence from brain damage due to injury and disease, scientists have been able to map different memory processes. Spatial location takes place in the hippocampus, so knowing where you are in the world. Memory of your own response takes place in the caudate, and object recognition, extrastriate visual cortex. And they're all right in the middle of the brain. And the reason that all of these very important memories portions are in the middle of your brain is to protect it. That's why they're there. That's why they're not on the outside. Otherwise, you'd get a concussion and you couldn't remember anything at all, ever, for the rest of your life. But of course, it's all protected because it's in the middle of your brain. Caudate nucleus. Okay, this is time to stop, so we're going to go ahead and stop. Caudate's really kind of interesting. It has to do with organizing your thoughts, pieces of information that come in. That's the job of your caudate nucleus. The problem with the caudate nucleus is, of course, if this thing misfires, now all of a sudden you have to do the same thing over and over and over again because it tells you what to do. Your caudate nucleus does. So this is where OCD comes from. If you are an OCD.
People who are schizophrenic, it's all over the place.
Yeah, it doesn't work. And instead instead of it, all these memories running down the road, they're just bouncing all over the place. Exactly. As much fun as that is. Anyway. There you go. OCD, that's where your OCD comes from. Organization.
I have organization, but I mean, I still, before me and Corey got married, I don't know why, but I still had the 45